Hey guys, what's up? So this is going to be my review of Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, which is considered by many fans, of course, to be the best of the saga, and is, of course, my personal favorite of the saga. And just like my reviews of the other films, we're going to go through a brief summary of the plot, and then the pros and cons, and then my conclusion. Alright, so let's get started. So The Empire Strikes Back picks up 3 years after the events of A New Hope. The rebels have relocated from Yavin to Hoth, which is a snow planet. The Empire eventually finds them, destroys their base, and they have to escape. Han, Chewie, Leia, and 3PO escape the Empire in the Falcon as the Empire chases them across the galaxy until they make it to Cloud City, where they run into Han's old friend Lando, while Luke has to go off to find Yoda, the most powerful Jedi ever, and the master of Obi-Wan, and has to train under him in order to finally confront Darth Vader. And obviously, as I'm sure you know, many people, and Star Wars fans in general, consider The Empire Strikes Back to be arguably the greatest movie sequel of all time. And I think the main reason for that is just because when Empire Strikes Back came out, it was like a slap in the face in terms of sequel, because at the time, generally, sequels to big movies didn't really tend to do well. They tended to be sort of a retread of the original. But what made, Empire Strikes Back such a huge surprise is that it went in a completely different direction than the original, and such an unexpected and darker and more dramatic direction. And I think that's mainly because A New Hope is sort of a fun adventure and, very straightforward, and, all the characters, are together. But with this, they split apart and have to go on their own separate adventures and storylines. And in fact, the story and overall tone of Empire might just be my biggest pro. And I think that's mainly because Empire does what I think every sequel should do, and that is, not retread the original, but to go in a completely different, unexpected direction, as well as put the characters through challenges, take some risks overall, and in general just have a very different feel than the original, so that way, you have more variety. Because I think, if Empire turned out the same as New Hope, if it kind of played out the same, I don't think people would like it as much, and I don't think it would have been remembered or, praised as much as it is now. The pacing of the movie overall is probably my second biggest pro with it. And that's mainly because the first act of the movie is pretty tight, because during the Battle of Hoth, when the Empire finds the rebel base and destroys it, the movie turns into kind of a chase and escape movie. After the Battle of Hoth and the base is destroyed, everybody kind of has to go on their separate ways. But it's not like the entire pace of the movie is fast. There are slow moments, but are slow on purpose for the sake of story. Some of the more emotional and dramatic moments or scenes are very slow paced, just so that you have more time to learn about the characters and more time to, understand what's going on. Especially with the scenes with Yoda and Luke and Han and Leia, those scenes are slow mainly for the story, and for character development, so that way you have more time to get to know the characters a little better, which again is another big pro that I have with Empire, is that it expands on the first movie, because you get to learn more about the characters and grow to care about them more. Like Han and Leia, for example, how they were so bickery and so against each other in the first movie, how through the course of this one they develop a really strong romance, because like I said, they're sort of forced to spend time with each other, and through that they grow to care about each other. And then of course the scenes with Yoda and Luke are really important, because through that you get to learn more about what it means to be a Jedi, and why the Force is so important. And that's another thing, freaking Yoda, man. He is easily one of my favorite characters in this universe just ever, because not only is he, funny because of the way he talks, but he's just so entertaining because he's so wise and so, like, very philosophical in terms of his views. You know, I think, and also, you know, what's great about him is that, like, he's not at all how you would, you know, expect a Jedi to be. You know, with A New Hope, you kind of expected all the Jedi to be like Obi-Wan, you know, human and also, like, very wise and noble. But with Yoda, he's the complete opposite of that, you know. Other than the fact that he's not human, you know, he's a little alien, but he's just so wise and interesting because of the things he says and how he challenges Luke's, you know, courage and faith in a way. Mainly because of, like, the tests that he gives him during their training, and also, like, just the lessons and, like, things that he tells and says to Luke, especially, you know, with the famous "do or do not, there is no try." You know, those teachings eventually become super important to Luke's development. You know, he really takes Yoda's advice into account and, like, you know, uses it later on, especially in Return of the Jedi. Like, for example, one of Yoda's more underrated lessons or quotes is how Jedi are supposed to be, you know, non-violent and, you know, more pacifistic. You know, when he says, a Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack. Which you get to see Luke do in Last Jedi, for example, you know, when he refuses to fight Kylo, as well as in Return of the Jedi when he refuses to fight Vader. You get to see Luke be very non-aggressive and pacifistic. And of course, you know, not only is Yoda super wise, but he's also incredibly funny, especially in this movie. Like, for example, the scene where him and Luke meet for the first time, you know, when Yoda pretends to be a completely different person. Like, the stuff that he says and does is hilarious. Like when, for example, R2 tries to take that little flashlight from him, and then Yoda just starts hitting him with his cane. Mine. But anyway, to get into my other pros, another one of the biggest pros with this movie is, of course, Vader. Why? Because he just gets so much more screen time and focus in this movie. Like, Empire is essentially Vader's movie, you know. He has a much bigger role and a more important role in the story than he did in A New Hope. And now that, you know, Tarkin and most of the Empire is gone, you know, he is the big man. He is in charge, next to Palpatine, of course. And you see that from his first scene in this movie, you know, when he threatens Piet and Ozzel, you know, just the way that he walks, and, like, also his costume looks more shinier and more darker and intimidating, you know. Not only does James Earl Jones give a better vocal performance as Vader than he did in A New Hope, but so does David Prowse as far as the physical performance. And, like, to me, what's great about Vader as a villain is that he doesn't need to say anything to be threatening. You know, you're automatically afraid of him just from his pure presence and physical build, you know. Like, he's intimidating in more than just a physical way. He's also intimidating in a sort of psychological way. You know, he uses not only his armor, but his power to incite fear in his victims, which you brilliantly see at the end of Rogue One in that freaking hallway scene. But no, Empire is Vader's movie just because of how much he dominates it. Like, every freaking scene that Vader is in this movie, he steals. Like, not only from when he's, you know, force choking Imperials and all that, but just, you know, when he tortures Han, and of course, you know, the I Am Your Father scene. You know, it's just, whenever he's on screen, you can't take your eyes off of him just because of how intimidating and interesting he is. You know, the more you see him, the more you want to know about him. And before I get into my cons, I'm going to go through my last few pros. Most importantly, just behind Vader, Luke is easily another one of my biggest pros with this movie, because his whole arc, not just in the trilogy, but this movie in particular, is great because he changes drastically from, like I said, from a whiny, naive farm boy to, a student, a learner who, wants to change, who wants to become better. But there's also some overconfidence that comes, with that, with him, especially when he decides to completely abandon his training to go save Han and Leia from Vader. He thinks that he's ready even though he hasn't completed his training. He's just kind of, in a way, blinded by his hatred of Vader and his desperation to save Han and Leia. And I think that's one of the reasons why he ends up losing to Vader at the end of this, in their amazing, amazing lightsaber fight, which is, of course, another pro because it's so much better paced and more dramatic fight than the fight in episode 4, and is super important story-wise because of what's going on between the two characters, because of Vader and Luke's relationship in this movie, before they even realize, they're related. And then, of course, when you find that out, Vader especially takes on a whole new sort of threat and, level of intensity, as well as, his and Luke's relationship. Like, you get a whole new perspective on that after the famous "I'm your father" scene. And speaking of which, my God, does it annoy me when people get the quote wrong. Seriously, it annoys me so much when people say, "Luke, I am your father." It is not "Luke, I am your father." It is "No, I am your father." That is the quote. If you were a Star Wars fan, you would know that that's the actual quote. People who say the line is "Luke, I'm your father" clearly have not seen Empire Strikes Back and clearly aren't Star Wars fans. And other than those characters and the story, a couple of my other biggest pros are the music. Like, Empire's score is fantastic, even though I like the score for New Hope and Revenge of the Sith just a tad more. But there's obviously so many great new memorable tracks in this movie. Like, obviously the Imperial March is freaking fantastic and might just be John Williams' best and most iconic track next to the Jaws theme, because every time you hear the dun 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 dun, dun you automatically know, hey, that's Darth Vader's theme, even though technically it's the entire Empire's theme as well. But not only that, like, there's tons of other great tracks, like Han and Leia's theme, Yoda's theme, the theme when Han gets frozen in carbonite, which is also easily one of the most iconic and memorable scenes in the movie, and one of my personal favorites, because, like I said, that scene, the "I love you, I know" scene, is perfect, not just because the, "I know" line from Han was improvised. The reason why the "I love you, I know" scene is so great is because, like I said, that, to me, is really the moment when Han matures as a character, because up to that point, throughout the entirety of New Hope and most of Empire, like I said, he was sort of a egotistical asshole. But, in that moment, when he says that to Leia, you really feel for him, because that's the moment when you realize that deep down he is a good guy. And I think that's also really the moment where he realizes it, and how Leia really, changed him in that way. And as far as my cons for Empire Strikes Back go, I really don't have any, come to think of it. I really don't. I mean, well, except for maybe you could say that, the first act of the movie kind of starts slow, but, New Hope gets better and better as it goes along, But really, story-wise and, in terms of details and smaller moments, there aren't really any I can think of that I don't like. I mean, Empire all the way through is great. There isn't really one super boring or unimportant moment in Empire. Everything that happens is important to the story. Not only for the foreshadowing with "I'm your father" twist, especially with the scene where Luke goes into the dark side cave on Dagobah and confronts the fake Vader, sort of similar to how Kylo confronts Luke's force projection at the end of Last Jedi. And so, with all that said, I will give Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, a freaking great, or a A+. Alright, see you guys later, bye.